Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Here are today's top stories. Americans from different walks of life joined President Trump at the White House today. They discussed the role that police have in our society. Some said now is the time when police support is needed even more. The Chinese Communist Party is retaliating after the U.S. sanctioned Chinese officials over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. The Chinese regime is targeting U.S. politicians. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced a plan to get students back to the classroom in the fall. He says schools can begin in-person learning when Phase 4 of reopening begins. China's flooding is getting worse. Water levels inside its biggest freshwater lake have hit record-breaking levels, and authorities say the flood control is in a dire situation. And an exclusive, a former Chinese web censor exposes the inside story of the Chinese regime's infiltration into the free world. He takes us behind the scenes at TikTok. President Trump held a roundtable discussion today about the role of police in society. He says he is pro-safety, pro-police, and anti-crime. A range of people shared their perspectives and experiences, from elected officials to common citizens.
The president, at a roundtable discussion in the White House, said this past week's violence was far worse than the last, with 20 people killed in Chicago and 88 shootings. He says it's worse than Afghanistan or any war zone that we're in.
With numbers are going to be coming down, even if we have to go in and take over cities, because we can't let that happen.
His administration has called the states hit hardest by violence, but Trump says they won't take any help from the federal government to quash the violence. One elected Georgia Democrat says he supports the president in supporting law enforcement.
And we lost a baby girl, too, in Atlanta, 8 years old, and it wasn't to a police officer. More people have died from the protest of Black Lives Matter than prior to that. And
he proposes that the law enforcement needs more funding for better training, equipment, and frequent psychological exams to make sure they're not too burned out after years of handling violence. An American citizen spoke out about why she feels police need more funding after going through a traumatizing experience when her teenage daughter was human trafficked by a group of gang members. She expressed her gratitude for the law enforcement's role in rescuing her daughter and supporting the family, but she wishes they had the means to do more.
Initially, the officers handling our case, albeit well-intentioned, were not trauma-informed and not able to differentiate a runaway teen from a victim of human trafficking.
Hers echoes the points of Attorney General William Barr. He said at the start of the talk that our nation faces unprecedented social challenges, which is why we need to invest more in the police force.
Kids growing up without fathers, alienated young, angry men, gangs engaged in the most brutal kinds of violence.
He says it's far worse than anything we've experienced in a major war, and that police are expected to, especially now, stand their ground and handle these matters. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
While some areas of the U.S. are seeing a new rise in virus numbers, New York is still going strong as it reopens its economy. The state's governor announced that schools will also reopen in Phase 4, but school districts have to pass the state's formula and guidelines.
In the southern and western regions of New York, states are seeing a second wave of CCP virus cases, with the state of Florida having over 15,000 new cases on Sunday. New York, on the other hand, has been showing relatively good numbers since it started reopening. Over the weekend, there have been close to 800 hospitalizations, the lowest since March, and of the over 50,000 virus tests, only about 1% came out positive. The governor said it shows that New York's reopening strategy worked. He also said that New York, which was the center of the virus, is becoming an example for beating the disease.
Remember where we started. We were handed this high infection rate because nobody knew the virus had come from Europe. So we started with a high spike. We had to get that spike down.
The governor also announced that in Phase 4, classes will be back in session. He said the way to determine if it's safe to reopen schools is the same as the economy, by looking at the virus numbers.
It's not do we reopen or not. You reopen if it is safe to reopen. How do you know if it's safe? You look at the data. You don't hold your finger up and feel the wind. You don't have an inspiration. You don't have a dream. You don't have an emotion. Look at the data.
In Phase 4, schools can reopen if the average infection rate of the region they're in stays below 5% in a 14-day period. Despite promising numbers, Cuomo expressed concern over the risk of people coming to New York from virus hotspots. The state issued an emergency health order requiring out-of-state travelers from virus hotspots to give their contact details to local authorities.
The Chinese regime has sanctioned 4 U.S. officials and 1 U.S. entity. This comes days after the U.S. sanctioned Chinese Communist Party officials for serious human rights abuses in Xinjiang. The CCP vowed to fight back against the sanctions, saying the U.S. interfered with its internal affairs.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has targeted 4 Republican politicians and the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China by placing sanctions on them, Chinese officials said on Monday. It's retaliating for the sanctions the Trump administration placed on CCP officials last week for human rights abuses against ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang region. Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are among those targeted. They have pushed legislation to punish CCP officials in Xinjiang. Senator Cruz wrote on Twitter, "The Chinese Communist Party is terrified and lashing out. They forced over 1 million Uyghurs into concentration camps and engaged in ethnic cleansing, including horrific forced abortions and sterilizations. These are egregious human rights atrocities that cannot be tolerated." Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey is being sanctioned too. He called on the world to condemn China's forced sterilization, abortions, and detention of Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, calling it genocide. Last week, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned 4 Communist Party members and 1 entity in China for serious human rights violations against ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. The action is taken as per President Trump's 2017 executive order, which builds upon and enacts the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. The Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctioned the Communist Party Secretary of the Xinjiang region and the Xinjiang Public Security Bureau, among others. The CCP vowed it will definitely fight back against the U.S. sanctions. China's foreign ministry spokesman said it was interference in its internal affairs and that it threatens its sovereignty. This is the latest in a rising tension between the 2 superpowers. The relationship has been strained after the CCP virus pandemic and the national security law in Hong Kong. Not to mention the Trump administration's countering Beijing's aggressive posture in the South China Sea with a commitment to ensuring the international rule of law. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
In response to NTD Washington correspondent, the State Department confirmed that Beijing's sanctions on U.S. officials are retaliatory, but that they won't stop the U.S. from holding CCP officials accountable for their human rights abuses. The department says the U.S. imposed sanctions on the officials for violating human rights, particularly of religious minorities in Xinjiang. Meanwhile, the regime imposes sanctions on U.S. officials who work tirelessly to expose those abuses. The department also said that there's no moral equivalency between the CCP's sanctions and the actions of countries that try to hold the regime's officials accountable. And a Chinese web censor learned the value of free speech and democracy and then defected to America. In our exclusive 3-part interview, he exposes the inside story of the CCP's complex system of internet censorship and how the Communist Party has been infiltrating the free world. Part 1 takes us behind the scenes at TikTok.
Liu Lipeng finally has the freedom to talk to our reporters about the CCP's internet censorship based on his personal experiences as a web censor. Liu has been working in internet censorship, what he calls a dirty industry, for over a decade. He used to work as a web censor for the Chinese microblogging site Sina Weibo, and later became the head of the censorship department at Le.com, one of the largest online video companies in China. Both companies are privately owned. Liu estimates China's private sector employs about 1 to 2 million web censors, almost as many as their Communist Party web commentators, commonly known as the 50 Cent Army. Web censors and the 50 Cent Army both work to suppress free speech. They delete posts that the authorities don't want people to see and spread fake or distorted news online. The 50 Cent Army is paid by the regime. However, the CCP doesn't want to pay to censor content from private internet companies. So to abide by the party's censorship regulations, all private internet companies have to hire their own web censors, which can amount to a large number. Liu says TikTok has at least 10,000 web censors, some of whom work at the company's Tianjin branch. TikTok is a video-sharing social networking service and very popular in the US and Europe. It is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. Liu described his experience visiting that branch for an interview as entering into a drug lord's lair. Everything there seemed hidden, and he was strictly forbidden from looking around while in the building. He was also kept away from the main working areas. Later, he discovered something TikTok has tried to hide.
I later realized TikTok was censoring American people's speech there. This huge number of Chinese web censors have been brainwashed by the CCP's propaganda for decades, and many of them are CCP members. These people living in fear of the CCP were there to censor American people's speech.
Liu explains TikTok has to obey CCP rules, even if it wants to operate in overseas markets. But it is impossible to apply the same level of censorship outside China, so the company has to promise the party it will do anything to stop Chinese people from using TikTok. He told us about who is not allowed to use TikTok.
The Chinese are not allowed to access TikTok. If you use a made-in-China cell phone, or if you have a Chinese SIM card, or if you are personally in China, any of these conditions will keep you out of TikTok.
Liu says the only reason TikTok has to withdraw from the Hong Kong market is that it overlaps with Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, which is only allowed to be used by Chinese people. Unlike other companies like Facebook or Google, TikTok did not mention anything about the national security law when they announced the withdrawal. Reporting by Xi Wenhui, NTD News.
Coming up, a suspect in New York puts an officer in a chokehold. Local reports say the man got away and later turned himself in, but he hasn't been charged so far. And hundreds of New Yorkers gathered in Queens to show their support for the NYPD and to honor officers who lost their lives on the job. We spoke to community members to find out why they came. Hear what they had to say after the break.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly. The Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if Hong Kong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
A video circulating on social media appears to show a man putting an NYPD officer in a chokehold. Local media say the suspect may have interfered with an ongoing arrest, which led to the scuffle.
Video of this July 1st incident was uploaded over the weekend to social media by an NYPD police union. A man appears to put an officer in a chokehold after the officer lunges at him in the Bronx. Local media says the officer lunged at the 29-year-old Wisnel Mansueta while he and his partner were trying to arrest someone else. From the video, it's not clear why the officer went after Mansueta, but the New York Post reported that the man allegedly kicked away a police body camera that fell off of one of the uniformed officers as they tried to arrest someone else. The police union alluded to how difficult it can be detaining people, and it criticized a bill that, if passed, would criminally charge officers who use chokeholds or other restraints that compress the diaphragm, like kneeling on the chest or back. Local reports say Mansueta turned himself in after running away from the scene, but hasn't been charged, and that the case is still under investigation. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Over the weekend, a group of New Yorkers gathered to support the NYPD. They say it's important to show their support for the police after recent attacks and ridicule. NTD's Melina Weiskup brings us more.
I'm here in Queens, New York, where hundreds of people have gathered to show their support for the NYPD in light of a $1 billion budget cut and calls to defund them even more. We spoke to the community to see why it matters for them to come out and show their support.
You got to stand up for your rights. And I did for this country for 27 years. So everybody should come out and defend the freedom that you deserve.
As a Cold War veteran, he says seeing the freedom he put his life on the line for being attacked is like a stab to the heart.
It's becoming a state of mind, okay, to become a radical. When you can't say all lives matter and you're considered a racist for saying all lives matter, there's something wrong with that.
But those who came out to support the police also faced criticism of their own. A group of protesters showed up to the event as well. Some were yelling at the crowd and police officers that were there.
They don't come out when it's black on black crime in Brooklyn, Bronx, like Harlem. I've been called every name in the book by the Black Lives Matter people. They call me a disgrace, but it's okay because I'm here to stand up for what I believe in.
Event organizer Adam Barnett expressed that it's hard to raise a child now in the current social atmosphere.
If you like one group, you're going to get hammered. If you like the other group, you're going to get hammered. There was a time when I was growing up, there was none of this. It was just everybody loved each other. Now it's if you have a point of view that people don't agree with, you're going to get ruined.
Amid the challenging circumstances, more police officers are now retiring. One 15-year veteran officer and the founder of the Blue Lives Matter movement warns that more veteran cops retiring means that younger cops won't receive the guidance they need.
The hardest thing, especially founding the organization Blue Lives Matter NYC, the morale of officers, when you have officers that are afraid to go out and say that they're a police officer, no matter if it's in New York City or Los Angeles, because they don't want to start an argument.
Imperatrice says there were around 12 shootings on Saturday night alone. Elisa Nahom, who's running for state senate, called defunding the police a dangerous move.
We've been here before in the 70s and the 80s where you couldn't take the train because you were definitely going to either get mugged or something bad was going to happen. I've been mugged on the train, so I know this.
She proposes that there are better ways to handle police reforms, like more community involvement and building better relationships between residents and police. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, China's biggest freshwater lake is bracing for unprecedented flooding. Areas around the lake are already among the worst hit in recent weeks, and residents are fearing for the worst.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
Heavy rains continue drenching large areas of China. Now the upper reaches of China's longest river are hitting the highest water flow rate in a century. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
A major flood has struck the upper reaches of the Yangtze River, China's longest river. An internal document we obtained shows the river's water was flowing at a rate of over 80,000 cubic meters per second. It also explained that it's forecast to exceed 90,000 cubic meters per second. According to local Chinese media, the river's flow rate was so high that it will soon break the highest record recorded in the last century, if it hasn't already. Officials in Jiangxi, a city located on the southern shore of the Yangtze River, issued an emergency notice on Monday, requesting that the entire city be evacuated. Now we focus on another area along the river, the Three Gorges Dam. Flooding is getting worse in some areas near China's famous Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydropower project in the world. Experts have warned that the dam is on the brink of collapse. That means as many as 400 million people may be at risk. But in a twist, local Chinese media outlets and social media platforms published an article saying, "Sorry, the Three Gorges Dam has done its best. Please stop criticizing it." The report says the dam is at its wit's end, adding that over 50 rivers in 8 provinces have already exceeded their flood warning levels. It also says that no matter how powerful the Three Gorges Dam is, it cannot let the water flow backwards. Officials in charge of the dam project have warned people not to pin their hopes on the Three Gorges Dam, as its capacity for flood storage is limited. Back in 2007, Chinese officials claimed the dam was designed to withstand once-in-a-millennium flood levels. Over half of China is now waterlogged. Now, at the same time, earthquakes have struck. According to China's seismic network, within 2 days, 6 earthquakes, magnitude 3 or higher, hit various areas of the country. 4 of them happened on Sunday. One hit the city of Tangshan, 90 miles east of Beijing. The quake clocked in at a magnitude 5.1. More than 30 consecutive aftershocks followed. About 40 years ago, the same city endured a magnitude 7.6 earthquake. According to official figures, 240,000 people died, making it the 3rd deadliest earthquake in recorded history. Unofficial figures say the real death toll was 3 times higher. City officials called Sunday's quake the aftershock of the bigger one 40 years ago, adding that locals have nothing to worry about. More earthquakes hit in the southwest province of Sichuan and the special district of Chongqing. Both areas are located along the upper reaches of the Yangtze River and upstream from the Three Gorges Dam. 2 quakes, one magnitude 4 and one magnitude 3, hit the areas on Sunday. That's after a magnitude 3.2 earthquake hit the same area in Sichuan a mere 10 days ago. That same afternoon, a magnitude 4.4 earthquake shook an area in the southwest province of Yunnan. One day later on Monday, 2 more quakes, this time magnitudes 5.0 and 3.4, struck 2 regions in Xinjiang. The U.S. State Department issued a travel advisory over the weekend for China. The security alert warns U.S. citizens to exercise increased caution in China due to the rising risk of detention and bans from leaving the country. U.S. citizens could face longer jail time without U.S. consular support or information on what their alleged crime is. This comes after Beijing passed its draconian national security law in Hong Kong. The draft includes people from outside Hong Kong that could potentially be punished for so-called violating the law. Lawyers and activists have expressed concern that China could use this as extraterritorial jurisdiction against anyone anywhere in the world. It's seen as an attempt to stifle global criticism of the regime. The State Department did not say what prompted the alert, but did add that U.S. citizens could be targeted, even for sending private messages. The alert added security personnel may detain and/or deport U.S. citizens for sending private electronic messages critical of the Chinese regime. The security alert comes as tensions remain between the 2 countries over a number of issues, from trade to the virus pandemic and human rights abuses in regards to Uyghur ethnic minorities.
The water level of China's largest freshwater lake hit record-breaking levels. Regions around the lake face the risk of serious flooding while water levels continue to rise. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
Regions around China's biggest freshwater lake are now bracing for new rounds of unprecedented flooding. China saw its worst flood in recent years in 1998, and this past weekend, the water level inside Poyang Lake broke the 1998 record. The lake is located in areas already among one of the worst hit in China, the southeastern Jiangxi province. Local authorities raised the flood alert response to its highest level. A Chinese state-owned media reported that over 500,000 people have been evacuated, but some are still trapped without any basic supplies.
Now I don't have any food to eat. I don't even have any rice at home. What should I do?
Miss Yu's village at the south of the lake has been submerged. She is over 70 years old and hasn't received any government aid at this point. 3 hours away, northeast of the lake, a resident said the flood burst many embankments.
We're in a very miserable situation. The embankments have burst and water is overflowing.
Traffic also shut down.
The roads are gone. They're all broken and submerged.
Jiang now relies on boats to get around. He fears the flooding will get worse. China's National Weather Service said the water level inside Poyang Lake will continue to rise over the next days. Flood control remains a challenging task. Jiangxi province has over 1,500 miles of embankments surrounding rivers and lakes, and almost 90% of these bodies of water are seeing water levels going above the warning level. Han Lu and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Coming up, PepsiCo is reporting higher earnings than expected. More people stocked up on the snacks in the second quarter during stay-at-home orders. And sales of newly built homes surged over 50% last month. It's the largest annual increase in over a decade.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and bite-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country has just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try the Epoch Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values, and it reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global outbreak, and so much more, then you need to check out the Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just a single $1, and we'll send you a very special free gift. A giant timeline that's 3 feet by 4 feet, documenting the FBI's abuse of FISA spy warrants. So go to readepoch.com and claim yours today.
Sales of newly built homes are up 50% year on year. John Burns Real Estate released results of a new survey today. It's the largest annual gain since the housing crash a decade ago. Record low mortgage rates are fueling new home purchases, and people are moving to the suburbs. Homeowners also want more high-tech features and more space for working or homeschooling. Another survey by Taylor Morrison reported an even higher increase in June home sales, a 94% annual jump. And the Trump administration will place new tariffs on over $1 billion on French goods, but it will hold off on implementing them while negotiations on a new French digital tax continue. NTD's Paul Greeny spoke with an international trade expert to get his thoughts.
The Trump administration announced additional duties of 25% on French imports. It's in response to the country's digital tax on U.S. tech companies. But the U.S. Trade Representative's office said the levies would be delayed for 180 days to provide time for negotiations. The affected French imports are worth about $1.3 billion in total. They include French cosmetics and handbags, but cheese and wine were dropped from an earlier announcement. According to the U.S. Trade Chief's office, with the additional 25% of tariffs, the tax dollars the U.S. could collect would be comparable to what France would get from American tech companies, which is estimated at about $450 million in 2020. Big companies sometimes set up headquarters in low-tax European countries to dodge taxes. The French digital service tax is seeking to raise revenue from these companies. But the U.S. says the tax unfairly targets American tech giants, such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon. For now, the two trade partners are both delaying the taxes for more time to negotiate. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has been trying to facilitate a compromise.
PepsiCo's quarterly revenues are coming in higher than expected. Americans stocked up on snacks like Tostitos, Cheetos, and Doritos before hunkering down for the nationwide lockdowns. PepsiCo's CEO says it gained market share in salty, savory snacks. Under its Frito-Lay North America brand, sales rose 7% in the second quarter, while Quaker Oats surged 23%. But North American beverage sales fell 7% as restaurants remained closed and sporting events delayed. The company expects its beverage sales to perform better in the second half of the year. Overall, PepsiCo reported net revenue of about $16 billion, beating analyst estimates. The company earned $1.32 per share. Analysts expected $1.25. Pepsi stocks jumped nearly 3% on news of its quarterly earnings. And more signs of a production shift away from China. Apple supplier Foxconn is going to expand one of its factories in India. The factory currently makes the iPhone XR, and soon it will produce more iPhone models than are currently being made in China.
Apple supplier Foxconn will invest up to $1 billion to expand a factory in India. The factory is where Taiwan-based Foxconn assembles iPhones for Apple. The move is part of Apple's quiet and gradual production shift away from China. One source told Reuters Apple asked its clients to move part of the iPhone production out of China. Foxconn's planned investment in the plant, where Apple's iPhone XR is made, will take place over the next 3 years. Some of Apple's other iPhone models that are made in China will also be made at the Indian plant. The expansion will add about 6,000 jobs. India is the world's second biggest smartphone market, but Apple only accounts for about 1% of smartphone sales in India, where the pricey iPhone is seen as a status symbol. Building more phones in the country can help Apple save on import taxes, keeping prices lower. Last month, Foxconn's chairman said it would ramp up investment in India.
Coming up, as countries harden their stance towards China, one lawmaker says the horrific crimes reported about the Chinese Communist Party sound similar to the atrocities that took place in Nazi Germany.
I have traveled all over the world to 50 countries now, and I have never seen a production any better than this, anywhere.
It's absolutely out of this world.
It's blown away my expectations.
It was just a superior performance that truly could bridge the world through music and dance.
Startling and breathtaking. We haven't had quite an experience like that in all the years that I've lived here, so it was special for us.
I think that I learned more in this performance than I actually do in a whole week of school.
The beautiful costumes and people just float. The choreography is incredible, and the storyline, beautiful, beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I'm getting teary-eyed watching. It's very moving. You feel it. You're feeling the show.
It's like a mini vacation that transported me into another place, into another world, into another culture.
When I came here tonight, I felt very dejected about the human race, about everything going on in this world. And during the performance, I just felt now there is hope for each of us individually, as well as for all of us collectively.
Shen Yun was more breathtaking, more heart-wrenchingly beautiful, more amazing than I had expected. It's very difficult to put into words, actually. You just have to come see it.
In the UK, as lawmakers urge the Foreign Secretary to target human rights abusers in China with new sanctions, one member of Parliament says the atrocities happening now under Communist China are parallel to what happened in Nazi Germany. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has this report.
As the US sanctioned 4 Chinese officials for their human rights abuses against the Uyghur ethnic minority in Xinjiang, the UK drew up its first list of designations. It includes notorious individuals and organisations in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Burma and North Korea.
This is only the first wave, the first tranche of designations. We'll be making others in due course.
He hasn't ruled out sanctions on Chinese officials or Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam.
And the more that countries such as the United Kingdom and the United States unite and let the Chinese Communist Party know that it is intolerable to subjugate their people and to let those who profit from slave labor camps and the suffering of the masses, hopefully it'll become less and less worthwhile for them to trade in human souls.
The UK Parliament in June debated human rights violations in Xinjiang, an autonomous territory in northwest China. It was in response to a report that found Beijing used mass sterilisation and forced abortions to suppress birth rates in Uyghur ethnic minorities.
All these things that we associate in Europe with the atrocities of the Third Reich, of the most beastly act of the most venal, villainous, totalitarian state the world had yet known, Nazi Germany. Story after story that breaks my heart and makes me weep. Coming out of communist China, there are parallels. There are parallels from what happened out of those extermination camps in Eastern Europe in the Second World War.
The Foreign Secretary says the new sanctions enable the UK to engage with countries while at the same time holding individuals to account for their human rights violations. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
A college of Cambridge University has accepted nearly $450,000 US in donations from a Chinese government agency and Huawei. Then the college published a white paper which is accused of reputation laundering for Huawei. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more stories from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and European news. A Cambridge University college accepted almost $200,000 from Huawei. A Freedom of Information request by The Times revealed the donation. Cambridge's Jesus College accepted the funds in February. Its China Centre published a controversial paper describing Huawei positively. The Times newspaper also reported Cambridge's China Centre accepted over $250,000 directly from an agency of China's State Council in 2018. The China Centre's director, Professor Peter Nolan, is in a role supported by an over $4.6 million donation by the daughter of a former Chinese Prime Minister, Wen Jiabao, The Times has said. To further pandemic issues, a farm in central England is now on lockdown after 73 workers tested positive for the CCP virus.
Up to 200 labourers picking crops at A.S. Green and Company have been told to self-isolate together on the farm. The effort is now being supported by Public Health England. Herefordshire Council, an arm of the county government, has organised deliveries of food and other essential supplies to the workers.
Most of them are from different parts of Eastern Europe. They are seasonal workers.
Herefordshire Council believes the outbreak is contained on the farm after tests of management and visitors have so far come back negative. According to the council, the farm workers in quarantine are being treated as one extended bubble and are staying within mobile home groups. UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock revealed that more than 100 localised outbreaks of the CCP virus are happening each week in England. He says that many of these are being dealt with swiftly and silently through small lockdowns and new testing methods. The farm in central England is the first such business to go into lockdown.
Hancock also revealed that England's test and trace system has diagnosed nearly 150,000 people who now know they need to self-isolate. He reports England has the largest testing capability in Europe, over 300,000 tests a day. Moving on, Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Nathan Law is now in London. Today he took to his Twitter account. With my backpack and small luggage in hand, I boarded my night flight. I had no idea what future awaited me. Only one thing seemed certain, my destination, London. Law came to prominence in 2014 during Hong Kong's umbrella movement. He fled Hong Kong 10 days ago, one day after the so-called national security law was imposed by the Beijing regime. There have been many arrests there since, but it seems Law is not about to stop his Hong Kong activism. There's always one message I have. Hong Kongers will never give up. We aren't fractured, on the contrary. We're well equipped to face the next difficult battle. To the migrant situation, the UK and France have signed an agreement to jointly tackle the issue of migrants crossing the English Channel.
Over the past weekend, UK Home Secretary Priti Patel and her French counterpart Gérald Darmanin signed an agreement to create a joint intelligence cell to prevent migrants from crossing the English Channel. Darmanin is the new French Home Minister, and one of his first moves was to order the dismantling of several makeshift camps and move hundreds of migrants out of Calais. But volunteers helping the migrants doubt if the move will work.
What's deplorable is that the same thing happens all the time. There are always dismantlements, there are always people who come back, and the problem is that right now there are more people because it's the summer and people are coming.
In the last few years, more and more migrants in Calais and other French ports risk their lives by using small boats, inflatables and even kayaks to cross the dangerous English Channel. More than 2,400 migrants are estimated to have crossed the Channel from France in small boats this year.
And in Germany, Germans are opting for higher price, better quality meat and meat substitutes. Repeated CCP virus outbreaks in German meat plants have them worried. This as poor working conditions in the industry persist.
Germany is Europe's biggest pork producer and consumer, and the pandemic may push them further along the trend of paying more for high-quality meat and even vegetarian meat alternatives.
Yes, it is deliberate, because the quality of the meat is important to me, and I don't want to just buy such a mass-produced meat for myself and the family.
Several virus outbreaks at German slaughterhouses and meat processing plants have attracted the public's attention. Subcontracted workers there from Eastern Europe have been living in cramped accommodations.
It is not only about animal welfare, it is about human welfare, and that will become entrenched in people's minds. In this respect, the meat industry will definitely have a hard time in the near future.
Germany's meat consumption has been declining for years. People prefer to buy less of it for health reasons and animal welfare concerns. CCP virus outbreaks in the industry are only quickening that change. Sales of processed meats have also steadily fallen in the last 5 years, even though the number of vegetarians in Germany doubled during that time.
That's all for today from our NTD UK newsroom. Back to New York.
Thanks, Neil. Up next, find out how a French designer integrates medicine with design and Hollywood with haute couture. And more safety measures are in store for visitors to the most magical place on Earth. That's as Disney World, Orlando, and a few others join the ranks of reopening theme parks. Find out more when we return.
Years of Chinese music and dance in one night.
Just so inspiring. It makes me want to go dance.
It's breathtaking, brilliant.
It's out of this world.
This week on America Uncovered, Jeffrey Epstein's best friend has been arrested. And why is it so hard to sue the police even when they break the law? Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NTD America.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly. The Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if all Gong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
In Paris, fashion houses were deprived of their classic one-way show, but that didn't stop them from getting creative and presenting their new collections. Our France correspondent David Vives visited a top Parisian haute couture designer who was inspired by Hollywood's golden age actresses.
Haute couture is a specific type of craftsmanship with its own rules and codes. It all starts at the dip of a pen.
I started to design when I was 3 years old. My mother gave me the pen to sketch, and I start with Mickey Mouse.
In this workshop he calls his laboratory, designer Julien Fournier creates his collections. Unlike pret-à-porter, where a woman has to fit the dress, haute couture is a traditional form of dressmaking that is custom-fitted. Before being trained with several top names in fashion, such as Jean-Paul Gaultier, Fournier studied medicine, an appropriate start for a couturier, someone between a surgeon and a magician.
Haute couture is architecture, so you need to be very sharp. You can make a parallel between surgeons and grand couturiers, because in fact you heal the body.
And for this particular design, he created a dress with a kimono sleeve without making any cut.
The first layers, it's the silk with an application, an embellishment of real gold on it, and you have a chiffon in a rose pale pink.
From the legendary mouse to his meeting with Apple's CEO Tim Cook, Julien Fournier might be the most American of the French couturiers. He was inspired by actresses of Hollywood's golden age.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve?
You have to understand something very important, that the first best customers for haute couture during the 40s and the 50s was the New Yorkese woman. She was completely obsessional about Dior, Jacques Fat, Charles James, and it was at the same time the golden age of Hollywood with Marilyn and Ava Gardner, Veronica Lake.
During this time, all French designers were in the studio, creating their best work for the outfits of the female stars. According to Fournier, perfection is only to be found beyond life, but designers can aspire to it. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
More of the Walt Disney Company's theme parks are finally reopening their doors after months of closure. But a visit to the most magical place on Earth will now involve some extra safety measures.
Mickey Mouse fans and magic-starved tourists marched down Main Street over the weekend. Two of Disney World Orlando's 4 theme parks are once again saying, "Be our guest." But the Disney experience will be a little different for the time being, as park staff, known as cast members, work to keep visitors safe. Events that draw large crowds, like fireworks shows, parades, and live shows, are on pause for now. And both visitors and employees will have their temperatures checked, have to wear masks, and maintain social distance. Guests will also notice numerous hand-washing stations. Hopping between parks is also prohibited, and guests will need a reservation to visit. Magic Kingdom and Animal Kingdom reopened on Saturday, while Disney World's other two parks, Epcot and Disney's Hollywood Studios, have to wait another 4 days. Similar safety measures are being taken in other Disney's parks as well. Tokyo Disneyland, which reopened earlier this month, is keeping visitor capacity to 50% or lower. One Japanese university student says she's happy to be back.
I'm looking forward to eating and going on rides after such a long time. These are things I haven't been able to do recently.
And next up on the list to reopen under new rules is Disneyland Paris on July 15th. All staff and guests over 11 will have to wear masks at all times, and plexiglass will separate visitors and staff where possible. But unlike at least one park in Japan, guests will still be allowed to scream their hearts out on roller coasters.
If the client wants to scream, we're not going to tell them, no, you can't scream. There are so many things we put in place, but it's still a theme park where people still have to come to enjoy themselves.
Contact with Disney characters will be limited, and visitors are encouraged to take socially distanced selfies with Mickey Mouse rather than traditional hugs. But staff will still do their very best to make sure every child feels the magic.
Have you checked the sky for the newly discovered comet yet? You can see Comet NEOWISE here, starting out on the lower left side of the screen in this footage taken near Seattle. It's the first visible comet of 2020, and it's expected to stay visible to the naked eye through July. The best time to see it is at early dusk or dawn. Look for NEOWISE to climb higher into the sky before it disappears into its orbit in August. It will be closest to Earth on July 23rd. It was first spotted by a NASA satellite. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Just over a week in, what do we know about the national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing? How is the Chinese regime becoming increasingly belligerent internationally, from its border with India to the South China Sea? And how does the Chinese Communist Party mine and use the data of Americans? Should the US ban Chinese-owned apps? In this episode, we sit down with political commentator and China analyst Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
China's biggest freshwater lake looks set for unprecedented flooding. Areas around the lake are already among the worst hit in recent weeks, and residents are fearing the worst. China raised its flood response alert on Sunday to the second highest level. This as heavy rain battered regions along the Yangtze River. It's not just floods battering areas of China. Now earthquakes are shaking various regions. 6 earthquakes within 2 days, one even reaching a magnitude 5.1. A video circulating on Chinese social media is causing concern over the country's food security. It alleges a granary of a major state-run grain stockpiler is full of moldy, poor-quality corn. And an exclusive, a former Chinese web censor exposes the inside story of the Chinese regime's infiltration into the free world. He takes us behind the scenes of censorship at TikTok.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country has just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try the Epoch Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values, and it reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global outbreak, and so much more, then you need to check out the Epoch Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just $1, and we'll send you a very special free gift. A giant timeline that's 3 feet by 4 feet, documenting the FBI's abuse of FISA spy warrants. So go to readepoch.com and claim yours today.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.